Welcome to But Are There Dragons, a podcast where two friends pick a book at least one of them has not read and work their way through it a few chapters at a time.
I'm your host, Kritter.
And I'm your host, Jess.
And we're continuing this adventure with The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien, with me as the resident Lord of the Rings veteran.
And me as the Lord of the Rings first-timer.
In this, our 5th episode of Season 3, we're going to discuss Book 3, Chapter 11, and Book 4, Chapters 1 and 2. So, pretty exciting that we've made it into Book 4. How are you feeling, Jessica?
Very excited. We get to see some old friends by breaking into Book 4. So,
did you expect that? Like it being broken up by book?
I actually didn't. So this is another thing where I really don't look ahead. So I didn't even look at chapter titles. So as I flipped into book 4 and saw the first chapter title, I was like, oh, I probably could have guessed. But I didn't.
Why? Well,
I like to come to the experience fresh.
I like it. That's a good attitude to have. But before we do revisit some of our old friends, we've got more recent friends in while we're still in book 3. So you ready to dive in? Any new news? I will point out, if you're not watching on YouTube but you are listening on the podcast platform, Jessica's got a bit of a different background going. How excited are you for that? What do we have behind you, if you want to describe it?
So what we have behind me is a ridiculously large bookshelf that I just purchased and checker block filled with everything that has been in boxes. I think I've mentioned before that we were about to perform a move. Said move is done, new shelves acquired, and swag is appropriately represented behind me. So I'm very excited because of my old space. I wasn't able to have my shelves behind me. So I am super excited. That's what's new with me.
That's awesome. So what I can see right now from where I'm at is we've got some Wheel of Time, we've got some Brandon Sanderson, we've got Gone with the Wind, like front and center. Do you have Lord of the Rings on your shelves?
I do. Right above The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is in a little set right there. I also have
cute.
a gray down there, Lord of the Rings. But it didn't fit the aesthetic that was happening over here. These are all my little books.
That's so cute.
So
I love bookshelf organization schemes, like the way they just sometimes.
There was lots of tweaking. I kept sending people final pictures, and then 3 to 5 minutes later, I'd send them another final picture.
Well, I have to say congratulations. I think it looks amazing. I love a good bookshelf, and I think you really nailed it. The shelfie game is strong here today.
Thanks, Chica.
All right. You ready to get into the books?
Let's do it.
The book, I guess. Okay, so book 3, chapter 11, The Palantir. The party departs Isengard, and Merry manages to get some information from Gandalf about their next steps. When they camp for the night, Pippin is inconsolably curious about Gandalf, and particularly the mysterious glass ball. He knows he can't have it, with Gandalf sitting on it like a hen on an egg, but he doesn't just leave it at that. Thoughts on Pippin's insatiable curiosity and a little bit of burglary in this chapter?
So at first, I didn't think much of it, which I think leads me to compliment the subtlety of Tolkien when he wrote it. At first, I didn't really think much of it. And then the way that he kept kind of hounding Merry about how he just wasn't going to be able to go to sleep without knowing more. And at one point, I had highlighted it in my Kindle, and it said, this feels a lot like ring type behavior, and I don't like it.
Oh, okay. I can see that. See, I was thinking more along the lines of he's giving Bilbo here, like the consummate burglar. You know, he went so far as to replace the Palantir with a stone so that Gandalf wouldn't
Indiana
notice.
Jones.
Very Indiana Jones. Yeah, it's just like, we were so surprised, or maybe we weren't surprised, but it was fun to see how Bilbo kind of eventually came to thrive in his burglar role. And it turns out that he's not the only hobbit that's got some skills.
No, so that was really impressive, but it was It was both things at once. It was impressive how he was able to get it away from Gandalf, but also equally terrifying that he wanted it so bad that he was willing to go to those lengths. And in my mind, I had already drawn a correlation between the draw of this Palantir and the ring, that it made me, it heightened the discomfort I felt as well.
Yeah, no, it's like a really good connection to have made. I didn't even think about it that way, but he was like truly fixated on it. The moment he saw it, turns out he just got hooked. So yeah, it's giving ring for sure.
Yeah.
So we didn't get anything from this at first as far as details. Pippin takes it, he looks into it, he screams, and he gets caught. This left me like kind of impatient for details. Were you like, oh, we're not gonna find anything out at this point, or did you expect something later?
I hoped that we would get something. It actually kind of, so there is another book series from my childhood called Dragonlance, and there is a magical orb that does gnarly things to people in it in that book. And so that very much put me in mind of that for any, Dragonlance buffs out there. So I was like, they're going to tell us. They're absolutely going to tell us. But I was absolutely on the edge of my seat. Obviously, this is all new content for me. I had no idea what to expect from this. So I was very enthralled for this chapter.
Right. So he did eventually relay what went down with some major prying from Gandalf. Were there any standout details for you?
I have highlighted here, forgive you, tell me first what you have done. And I had also, I don't think I wrote it down, that, the look on Gandalf's face was haggard and weary. And he was very concerned about Pippin's welfare.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how I chose to read it. There's also another great quote from this area: "Do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger." I had not heard that quote before, so I thought that was pretty neat.
It honestly, it sounds just like a phrase anybody could say. It sounds like obvious words of wisdom that I could have thought of if I thought about it for a second. But yeah, it's just, Of course that's the case.
Yeah. So, and honestly, Merry and Pippin leading up to this had just had a discussion of how Gandalf was the same, but also how Gandalf was different. And even the way they described it was, good old Gandalf, but also a little scarier, to paraphrase how they said it. That's really, oh, he's still Gandalf, but like little bit scarier.
Yeah, not fully sure what his vibe is.
So I thought that this was fascinating, and that Pippin was reluctant to own up to what actually happened because he knew that he had messed up so bad and was genuinely scared to tell Gandalf. But this was another huge lore dump that seems like it's only about the Palantir, but still gave me so much more insight into the difference and the relationship between Isengard and Mordor, Sauron and Saruman, and the nature of the Palantir itself. Like, I really only know what the movies had told me.
Yeah.
And it was just a seeing eye. But the idea of him being able to converse with Pippin through it was horrifying. The stuff of nightmares. So really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it was. So things that stood out to me whenever he could see through it, obviously, because it's also like a seeing eye, glass, whatever. There were 9 winged creatures. So I'm like, okay, we've got the we've got the ring race, the 9 men and their fell beasts. Whenever he's in interacting with Sauron initially asked why he had delayed reporting for so long, implying that he thought that Pippin was Saruman at first, and also that Saruman had been avoiding him before Isengard was even taken, I assume. So that was like an interesting. You mentioned figuring out the interplay between Mordor and Isengard. That was part of the plot. They were not exactly seeing eye to eye at that moment. We did kind of know that, but just that it was confirmed straight from the horse's mouth was interesting. And then once Sauron found out that it was a hobbit like whenever he was like, "Who are you?" or "What are you?" or whatever, and Pippin responds, "A hobbit," he gets all like hyped and extra cruel. I thought that was kind of really chilling. Basically just like, don't go anywhere, I'm coming for you. Just like, ugh, that's kind of terrible to have that kind of, person or being focused very, very exclusively on you. Wouldn't have been my choice to be in Pippin's shoes just then.
Not at all.
Not at all. Gross. So after that horrible encounter, Gandalf takes the Palantir back and offers it to Aragorn, who notes that it was probably his by right anyway, as it likely belonged to his great, etc. grandpappy Elendil. Any final thoughts about this one Palantir?
It's crazy to me that these are around and that Aragorn would be an inheritor of this.
Yeah.
That it would go to someone who is not a wizard. But okay.
Yeah.
The other thing about this exchange was the way that Aragorn and Gandalf had a little back and forth here, just a blip, where Gandalf essentially tells them, be wary, don't be hasty, whatever you do, don't use it yet. And Aragorn basically says, when have you ever known me to be hasty or unwary? And then this is just such a great line. Gandalf's reply is, never yet. Do not then stumble at the end of the road. And I was like, so I liked it because Aragorn kind of pushed back, like, I'm a pretty sensible dude.
Yeah. Have some faith.
Yeah. But Gandalf still, stay the course, brother. Don't trip now. That would suck.
Right. Well, Gandalf doesn't even trust himself to look into it now. And so it's like, if he's doubting himself, he has every right to doubt literally anybody because he's Gandalf the White Man. Yeah, that was an interesting exchange for sure. I get more and more, I don't know why I keep getting surprised by Aragorn, because when he was Strider, he felt a little more reserved, I guess. He felt a little more, I don't want to say like self-conscious, but just not as sure of himself. He was fine, but nothing like crazy. And then he just has come into his own as Aragorn, son of Arathorn.
I feel like he was very casual, like not.
Yeah, and now he's like, oh yeah, that's mine anyways. And I'm like, oh, okay, sir. Yeah. Like, good for you, I guess. Yeah, which I don't hate. I like somebody who knows what they're owed. I guess what they're worth. So there was another line in here. It was actually not Aragorn or Gandalf, but Theoden said something that I had to literally like read like 7 times to figure out what he was saying. He says, "Oft evil will shall evil mar," and I was reading "will" as a verb, which is why I was having a problem. But yeah, it's just a testament to how sometimes the way that Tolkien writes is a little dense. There's just like this
4 times. I read that sentence 4 times.
Yeah, it's like, okay, what the heck? Like,
what am I missing?
Yeah, how am I misreading this? They're not big words. So yeah, just if you ever struggle or need to reread any passages or sentences, don't feel bad. Happens.
You can sit with us. It's cool.
Yeah, you can absolutely sit with us. That one was a tongue twister, a little brain burner. All right, so a flying creature unexpectedly passes over the moon, and even though they were kind of like camped for the night, Gandalf just basically orders them all to ride on. Like, we've got to get out of here. The Nazgul have crossed the river. Pippin is with Gandalf and observes that he's riding bareback. They're riding ahead on Shadowfax. And Gandalf remarks that Shadowfax won't have a harness and you don't ride him. He decides whether or not to carry you, and if he does, then he'll keep you on his back unless you decide to literally jump off. Yeah. So what do you think, Horse Girl? Best horse ever?
Oh, I love it. Yeah. No, I read it and I wrote dang straight.
Yeah, of course you don't ride Shadowfax.
The Lord of the Horses. Come on now.
Yeah. It's, oh my gosh, this reminds me of okay, have you seen Tropic Thunder?
when it first came out
Oh my
a gajillion
gosh.
years ago.
First of all, I absolutely adore that movie. Some of it I get is dumb humor, but some of it is so brilliant. I like can't get enough. It makes me LOL every time. But it reminds me of Robert Downey Jr.'s character when he like takes himself very seriously as an actor, and he's like, I don't read the script. Script reads me.
Yeah.
Like, you don't ride Shadowfax. It's not Shadowfax rides you. It's like Shadowfax decides whether to bear you, and if he does, then you don't have to worry about staying on his back. He'll keep you there. Just it was fun and intense. Sounds like a pretty great horse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Having ridden bareback at speed for a long distance, the reality probably doesn't hold up unless you have the Lord of Horses as your mount.
What was the occasion for that?
I was a horse girl, so you know,
had to give it a try.
Just decided to hop up. I was also 15 and bulletproof. I don't know about you, but when I was 15, I was indestructible. So, you know, nothing would hold me back from just taking my horse out on the lead line and just hopping up bareback and running down a trail.
Totally. How do you even get up on a horse without a saddle?
I'm 15 and you're this big around. You just
like grab the
hop
mane?
up like Legolas.
Oh, come on. You have to at least like pull yourself up somehow.
It does depend on how tall the horse is.
Oh, okay. That's fair. It's like my family actually for a long time, like my uncle and my grandpa and my dad, they would go hunting in Colorado like once a year, elk hunting if they drew the tags, and so they had mules, not horses. But they were shorter, stockier, more stubborn for sure. But I haven't ridden many horses in my life.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that's recommended behavior for anybody. I want to be 100% clear. PSA, don't let your children do that. This is a bad idea.
Okay.
I was unsupervised. I was unsupervised.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a very 15-year-old thing to do. So yes. I forgive you.
And I live to tell the tale. But Shadowfax sounds like a dream to get us back on the rails.
Yeah, like love that for everyone, that you don't have to worry about falling off.
Yes.
That could be really great for me, who's only rode a few horses in my life. Okay, so now that we've talked about the horse, we get a little bit more about the Palantir, which is
all of them,
plural of the Palantir. There were 7, possibly crafted by Feanor, who is a Noldor or a high elf of old, and men communicated with one another through them directly, except in the case of the one that was at Osgiliath before its ruin, which could basically look in on any of them, is what I understood. Gandalf guessed that Sauron got a hold of the one that was in Minas Ithil, which is the tower he took and turned into Minas Morgul. So that's a lot of new words, some of them new. Did anything pique your interest from the Palantir's backstory?
So again, there was one Palantir to rule them all, it kind of felt like, which, you know, and I did pay attention to the fact that there was one in Osgiliath and that, you know, it said, not Minas Tirith, the other Minas that was essentially taken over, you know, by the bad guys.
Ithil.
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome. Well, it's a lot of names. The only reason I know it is because I wrote it down. It's like, okay. Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Just to draw another analogy, you know, kind of like the Wheel of Time, Age of Legends types artifact, where this is how this was used in a more glorified time period in a past age. This is how this technology was used, or this how these arcane items were used, and now they're nowhere to be found,
or they're not being used for
or they're not being used as intended.
Right, the best purposes. Of course, like when I found out there was like one Palantir to rule them all, my first instinct was that's the one Sauron has, and then Gandalf decided, or at least speculated, that no, in fact, that's the one at Minas Morgul, and I understand that makes sense, but the paranoid me still is wondering, where is the master Palantir? Where is that thing hiding? Not that I can't even remember if I find out ever, but I am curious. Are you curious at all where the big one is?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Not just
Yeah.
me then. I'm just like, I'd
But
never
I'm
trust
like,
anyone.
are they sitting in abandoned towers, unused? You know what I mean? Are they
Yeah.
sitting in an attic somewhere?
Under rubble because Osgiliath fell. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. It could just be gone, which is a thing that happens.
Destroyed.
Right. So who knows? Anyway, so Gandalf lets Pippin know that they are actually headed to Minas Tirith. They're not going back to Helm's Deep or anything like that. And Pippin eventually begins to fall asleep with the strange feeling that him and Gandalf are still as stone, seated upon the statue of a running horse, while the world rolled away beneath his feet with a great noise of wind. That was the end of book 3. Final thoughts?
I loved that Pippin took advantage of his solo time with Gandalf and was kind of grilling him.
Yeah.
And even called him out a little bit, right? So he mentions to Gandalf that he wants to get some answers, and Gandalf feels chastised about how, it is my job to take care of you, and you are, I forgot how he worded it, but making me rethink how you define the word, meaning how I take care of others.
Yeah.
And then so Pippin continues to question him, and he says, what more do you want to know? And Pippin's like, the name of all the stars, of all the living things, the whole history of Middle Earth, of course. What less? And I'm just like, in that moment, I just loved him so much for just being
curious
Yes.
little hobbitses.
Yes. There was some poetry that was shared during Gandalf and Pippin's ride that had a hyperlink, so it was footnoted. But it was not behaving appropriately. It felt like it was taking me to another part of the book, so I didn't wind up reading it. But the lore that he was sharing in there seemed significant.
Okay. Palantir related? Was it
No,
around
I
that
feel
section?
like this was I feel like this was honestly, I thought it had something to do with the migration of the elves, like how the elves moved around. Hold on. I can find it. If we ever get through an episode where I don't have to look for something, it will be
well, but
a
then
miracle.
What's the point of taking notes or whatever? Like, this makes sense.
Oh, here we go. Tall ships and tall kings, 3 times 3. What brought they from the foundered land over the flowing sea? 7 stars and 7 stones and 1 white tree. So the 1 white tree made me think of what I believe might be the elvish origin story for at least Middle Earth. And I know that like there's a history. I don't know it all because have not read the Silmarillion, but I've definitely had enough context clues from the reading that we have done that it seems like the elves originated elsewhere, came here, and then, as a species are choosing to leave again. So that's what that made me think of.
Okay. Yeah.
And that could stay rhetorical, but that's,
sure.
That definitely caught my eye. And the 1 white tree specifically stood out.
Yeah. That also kind of reminds me of Rings of Power. There's a lot of trees in Rings of Power.
Yeah, so when it mentioned Feanor and the Noldor, I was like, is Feanor somebody that we met in Rings of Power? I don't know if we met him, but I believe he might have been referenced.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
And I fully intend to jump right back in when those come up.
Yeah, that one, we just got the teaser trailer for that. Okay.
Which I haven't seen because I've been unpacking books, but I'll be watching that very soon.
That's fair. All right. Anything else for book 3? Done?
No, that's it for book 3.
Okay. Big transition. Drum roll. Oh my gosh. Time. We're moving on to book 4.
Yeah.
Chapter 1. The Taming of Smeagol. So, you saw the movies. We know what's about to happen here, but 3 days have passed since Frodo and Sam departed from the Fellowship. So we are rewinding, pressing reset on everything we read from the Fellowship members, the other Fellowship members at least. Are you feeling like whiplash? Where are you at here with this jump back in time?
I'm glad that we're just jumping kind of almost at least all the way back instead of trying to do it like them in a hot spot and trying to somehow flash back and cover the interim time. So I would rather go back to the beginning. I'm with Gimli, right? Like I like a chronological story. It really works for me.
Yeah, I get it.
So I was glad that we, did the full rewind because that's honestly just easier for me.
That's fair. So the chapter starts out very hobbity. Sam is tiring of Lembas, craving bread and beer, still carrying around pots and pans with nothing to put in them. Meanwhile, Frodo is despondent over time lost and opportunities lost. Now, this to me feels like a big tone shift from what we were just reading. Like, would you agree? Does it feel different?
But we think about, so this is almost 2 weeks back.
That sounds right. Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Somewhere between a week and 2 weeks back. And if you think back to where we were at, Frodo just had that altercation with Boromir.
Yeah.
And he and Sam have been fleeing, not very successfully, in these really jagged hills. So I think despondency is definitely a tone shift, but seems justified given where we pick up with them.
Yeah, where he was back. God, 2 weeks. I'd have to actually count it, but it feels like so much has happened.
It was 9 days that the hobbits were separated, right? It was 9 days that Merry and Pippin were separated from Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli.
Wow.
And then we had more time pass.
Yeah.
So if for these, we have 3 days has passed since the Boromir altercation. So the start of this book.
Yeah. So
yeah, you could say probably 9 days roughly have passed.
Wow. Helm's Deep, Battle of Isengard, all of that, 9 days. Jesus. Whoever says that Tolkien is slow, they're wrong. It's very.
Yeah, no, I feel like we're doing stuff every episode.
Yeah, it's a lot.
We're making moves.
For sure. Okay, so Frodo finds a place he thinks is their best chance to climb down because they have been stuck, unable to really advance. And Sam agrees, but insists that he gets to climb down first, obviously. And this kind of becomes a theme this chapter. Do you have any thoughts about Frodo and Sam's multiple climbing mishaps?
I just love, I am there for the loyalty bid. So Samwise has many fine features. Loyalty is definitely a huge draw for me.
Yeah.
There's my favorite quote from this chapter, though, is about that, regarding Sam preparing to climb down first to, check it out for Frodo. It is doubtful if he ever did anything braver in cold blood or more unwise. And I love that, right? I know that it's not necessarily a way to live your life, but that to me encapsulates their entire relationship. Sam will do whatever it takes.
Yeah, I thought it was really sweet. I just, I love Sam. But one thing that made me really laugh was when he remembered that he had rope. Like they were trying to free climb down this cliff.
So I'd written a note of that dang rope. We knew it was a thing back in the day when it got mentioned, and here we are. And he even makes a comment about he carried it for hundreds of miles. And I just never have I ever related more, just being like, dang it, I put this Tide pen in my purse for a reason. I finally dumped the salsa on myself, and
I forget.
I got all the way home before I remembered I had the Tide pen. I get it.
Perfect analogy.
I get it.
Yeah. So he's he was so fixated on the fact that he didn't have rope. Then he gets the rope. Then he forgets about the rope. It just felt perfect. It was so relatable.
And then it turns out the rope is somewhat magical. So it sheds some kind of soft light that helps in a really important way. And then somehow Sam is magically able to ask nicely and the rope unties itself. Come on. That's awesome.
That is awesome. So I will point out before we move on is that I learned something new with this one. So Sam says that the rope was about 30 L's. And I had to look up L. So fun fact, an L is about 1.25 yards. So the rope was about 112 feet long, which is a long rope. Also, just for everyone's fathom is a word that I had heard before, but I never actually looked it up. 2 yards is a fathom. So that is a fact that we know now. And so we mentioned Sam and Frodo, they finally make it down with some help from this rope. And Sam laments the fact that they have to leave it behind, though you mentioned that didn't end up how it ended up. His exclamations, though, noodles and ninny hammers. I'm immediately adding that one to my repertoire. But you said the rope ultimately made its way down to Sam, just because he asked nicely or whatever. So do you think this is magic? Just magic with a capital M, elvish magic? What do we think?
I think it's lowercase magic. I think that, so we talked a little bit about how hobbits aren't an inherently magical species, but they had some traits that do seem to lend them abilities that can have an almost magic-like quality. And I feel like the rope is an extension of elvish lowercase magic. You know what I mean? That the work that they do is just imbued with this natural essence that gives advantage on the dex rolls. I don't know how else to explain it, but you're able to shake the rope and it just comes undone. And I love the fact that he was like, you can badmouth a lot of things about me, but don't be talking smack about how I tie knots.
Yeah.
Okay.
It runs in my family, okay? Yeah. I'm good at tying knots.
I've been tying knots since I've been knee-high to a grasshopper is the total vibe that I got from that. And the ninny hammer, he was calling himself names, and so I had to remember that Gaffer was his father. And so he's calling himself the names that his father would have called him, which is, again, very relatable, right? Like a lot of our inner monologues are dominated by people that we love.
True.
True. Yeah, I was like, oh, ninny hammer, something your dad used to call you. Got it.
Noodles. Such a good curse.
Yeah.
I love it.
But whatever you do, no knot slander. That's where we draw the line.
Yeah, he would be good at tying knots even outside the Shire. He would be considered an apt knot tire. So the two finally crash for the night once they've made it down, and they notice a dark figure climbing down the cliff after them like a nasty crawling spider on a wall. Ugh. Good description. Didn't love how it made me feel. Enter Gollum. Any thoughts about Frodo and Sam's Gollum snatching efforts?
So I was not happy that Sam's internal dialogue about Gollum was so kind of hateful. Just very. I'm not saying it's not deserved, but it starts out, really super negative. And I don't like that. Yeah. I do also think it's very creepy that Gollum can climb down head first. That's super creepy.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that Frodo got pretty assertive here. So once they figured out the thing with the rope, Frodo's like, I don't want to be caught out here. Frodo's really kind of taking charge and not just being a passive bystander.
Yeah.
So letting Sam know to go ahead and tie that to the stump and we'll do this and we'll do that. So that was another comment from this general vicinity. And then, so Sam even said he can try his nasty flappy feet on those ledges.
Yeah. He gets really spiteful when it comes to Gollum.
I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that, buddy.
Yeah. So speaking of this kind of interaction, it brings up an interesting legal and philosophical issue. So Frodo decides that they can't kill Gollum because he hadn't done them any harm. Sam points out that Gollum definitely intended to harm them, and Frodo responded that what Gollum meant to do was entirely a different matter. So there's this topic of debate. Preemptive punishment. To what extent can we punish a person or deprive them of liberty for something they haven't even done yet? There's also, of course, a concept of an attempted crime, which is punishable. But to convict someone of an attempt, they have to have taken like a step toward completion of the crime. That's sort of the requirement. I think Sam, in less words, is arguing that Gollum following them essentially was his step toward completion of whatever evil deed, probably murder, that he intended. And Frodo seems to think not, at least that he wasn't worthy of punishment just yet. What do you think? Would any punishment be too premature, or was Gollum attempting a crime here?
I will side with Frodo in this, even though it's a hard topic. And again, I feel like younger me had a different take than older me. I feel like younger me, when presented with the topic of preemptive punishment in movies like Minority Report or any other media, I find the idea fascinating. But as I've gotten older, intent does matter, but also so does following through. And we know that I stan Gollum in a lot of ways. So I'm sure that bias doesn't help. But if we were all damned before we took the action, redemption would never be possible for anyone. And I live in a world where I think that it's important to believe in our ability to redeem ourselves and to be better. And if we can't be better, then what are we even trying to do? Fair. So I want to believe in a world of redemption. And so I'm going to side with Frodo and say that it's not enough that he's following, that there is still something there to save.
Okay, that's fair. I tend to agree. I like the, we got flashbacks in this chapter of the conversation with Gandalf where who are you to decide who gets to live or die? There are people that live that deserve death and people that die that deserve life, all of that. And I love the sentiment. I do think I don't know that I would have gone as far as Frodo went in the trust department. Like,
right.
Not having him tied up, being okay with that. There were some, I think I would basically find myself in the middle between Sam and Frodo in the sense that I wouldn't trust Gollum and I would take steps to ensure that he couldn't betray me, but I also wouldn't tie him up and leave him to die or murder him in cold blood.
Right.
Basically, because I tend to agree. Him following them could also, even though he probably would have killed them, that's definitely conceivable. He was following them first and foremost because they had the precious, right? He could sense it.
He's driven to it.
And so it's not entirely his fault. So I'm like leaning towards you here a little bit. I know you're like, you've got that sympathy for him.
And I feel like Elijah Wood played it still very skeptical. It's so going back into this, knowing that we're with Gollum right away, absolutely I cannot wait to watch these. Oh, by the way, there is a showing of The Fellowship in my area and I'm going to go watch it.
Yes, I'm so glad.
Sidebar, everybody. Sorry, but I'm going to go watch it on the big screen for the first time ever.
That is so exciting. I'm going to go see The Return of the King because Mr. Kritter didn't want to go see 3 Lord of the Rings movies 3 days straight, which I guess I can understand.
So I only saw Fellowship in my area. I'll have to go back and look. As we know, June is a little bit of a busy month, so we'll see.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, it is. It's like Fellowship is on June 8th. It's literally like one of them is June 8th, one of them is June 9th, one of them is June 10th, or something along those lines. And so it's tricky. It's a Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So I'm seeing Return on Monday because that's the only day.
Well, that's funny because it's in my area on June 8th as well. But I only looked up The Fellowship is in my area on June 8th. So now I'm going to wind up going back and looking. I don't know.
Look at June 9th.
I'm going to.
But
I'm
I do
going
think,
to.
I wouldn't, if I were you, just because like you're putting off
I
watching them
am.
before you've read them, I would, you know, Two Towers is fair game because we'll be done reading them
Close
by then.
enough. Yeah.
Close enough at least. But I don't know. I would wait on Return,
Yep.
even though it is my favorite, just because.
Yeah.
But it's obviously up to you. I mean, getting to see them in theaters again is just such an opportunity that it's hard to pass up.
Fellowship is such a good movie that I'll be happy even if I just make it to that one.
It's a perfect movie. It's not my favorite of the three because it doesn't make me cry as much. And I love to feel the emotion. Yeah. But Fellowship, I think, is the most just bookended, perfect story. Yep. I think it's excellent. Just a beautiful, beautiful movie. So I think you've got a really good choice there. And I believe Fellowship is actually Mr. Critter's favorite as well. But we went with Return because it was up to me, because he was the one who limited how many we could go to.
I will say that Mr. Jessica had a similar sentiment. Like, you're only going to get one, and it's not going to be the Two Towers. It's like, oh, okay.
Some people's favorite is the Two Towers. That's so interesting. Not me, but some people. Some people. It's a good one. They're all good. I mean, they're amazing. Anyways. Yeah, anyways. Okay, so we talked about the conversations between Gollum and the hobbits. They were so interesting to me. There's pity, hostility, groveling, and lots of Gollum talking to himself. So how did these go over for you?
So I want to go back just for 1 second to you mentioning that flashback from the Gandalf conversation.
Yeah.
Tempering Frodo's response and counseling him to feel pity. Even the wise cannot see all ends. I love the fact that all of that dialogue was inset into this chapter. Like, it was thoroughly called out. Now, granted, it was only a Frodo flashback, but I love the fact that he put it right in. Yeah. And then the back and forth, Frodo telling Sam right up front, don't underestimate him. He's still very dangerous. Sam getting bit sounds terrible. Having all of this back and forth really just kind of points out just how far gone Gollum is. Just how desperate he is, the ingratiation, eventually swearing to them. Definitely he's clearly in a very desperate time. Yeah. And then the tying of the ropes, and the ropes feeling like it's burning him, and the lembus just revulsing, it just repels him. All of these things just show how far from the light he is. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Gollum asks where they're going, and Frodo's reply was kind of chilling for me. He's like, you know that. Like, you've guessed that. I'm just like, these two, they have this, they
have this weird connection.
They have this really weird connection. And so just the fact that Frodo kind of like changes when he talks to Gollum, his tone, his demeanor, everything. And Sam's like witnessing it, and we're witnessing it too. And he just feels like a completely different person. But
Frodo's also the first one to call him Smeagol. You know what I mean? Like, that's not Sam, that's Frodo, who is going to use his real name. And Sam even makes a comment about the two were in some way akin and not alien. So even Sam's, internal monologue comments on, there's already a parody there of some kind.
Yeah. It was weird. It was a weird thing to see. So you mentioned he tries to run away whenever they fall asleep, and then they catch him again, try to put him in a rope. The rope burns him, which I was skeptical about. I'm like, is he faking, because he's so manipulative? But then Frodo eventually comes to believe that it's really hurting him, so he takes it off of him and gets this idea that he should swear by the precious so that they can trust him. And the swear Gollum ultimately gives is to serve the master of the precious, which literally broke my lawyer brain. Because the master of the precious could be anyone. In this case, possession is 10/10 of the law. Did this bother you at all?
No, but I'm not a lawyer.
Okay. Really? God, I thought I was like, this is so transparent. How did Frodo not be like me?
I mean, it is. It is. So I took that, I feel like at first Frodo said, "Are you sure you want to swear on this ring? This ring that, you know, has this negative power. You want to be beholden to having your oath sworn on this ring?" So I was more caught up in that than the language of "I swear to the master." Not to say that I saw that it was full of wiggle room.
Holes, yeah. It bothered
but
me.
It just wasn't the thing that I was primarily focused on.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of forgot. Well, I didn't forget, but now it's making me think of how, you know, the game of riddles was like such a sacred thing. And I'm trying to remember, is there something similar with oaths where it's like in this universe, giving an oath is like more than just "I promise"? You know what I mean? I'm like, I might be wrong about that. Maybe I'm just thinking of the riddles. But the fact that Frodo assumes that the ring is going to like actually legitimately bind Gollum made me curious. Like, why is that the case? And is it just like one ring to rule them all? You know, that's just the vibe of the ring, or is there something more? Like, I don't know. Swearing on the ring, I guess it's like swearing on the Bible for some people, but even people who swear on the Bible end up breaking. They lie. Yeah. And so I was like, I would literally take this with an absolute grain of salt, but Frodo seems to think, for a while at least, it's going to hold him to it. And I just don't know why.
So I just took it. Like, I took it sight unseen. Like, sure, no problem, because it's a magical ring. So I was like, it's a magical ring. So to me, the premise that this has consequences, you know, for forsaking an oath sworn on this ring would likely have consequences, because we've seen how magical the ring is.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I just took it.
That's fair. I mean, I should basically, thing number one, why does swearing on this ring matter? Thing number two, doesn't matter because the oath he gave has so many holes poked in it, like that even if it was going to bind him, it's not really going to bind him. Those are my thoughts. I didn't like it, basically. And that's the end of the chapter. Any thoughts for the remaining of the chapter?
It commented at the end of this chapter that something about the oath triggered a tangible change in Smeagol's behavior. So this probably was represented on the screen in the movies, but to hear it called out, I was like, oh, okay, so we're attributing it to that?
He gets real friendly real fast.
He does. And I didn't know if it's intentional because he's trying to ingratiate himself, or if it's magically induced in some way. But his behavior has changed, and it's noted by the narrator at the end of this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, I constantly just think he's manipulating them, but I'm not as pro Gollum as you are, so that's
don't get me wrong. Problem. I know he's a nasty. I do.
Okay, so book 4, chapter 2, The Passage of the Marshes. The hobbits and Smeagol stop for a break, and to avoid the yellow face that Gollum hates, aka the sun, and they realize that, like the rope, Gollum can't handle lembas either. It makes the lembas taste a lot better in Sam's eyes, who takes the first watch. So throughout this journey, we kind of met, you talked about this before in the last chapter, but Sam remains quite suspicious of Gollum, more so than Frodo by far. At this point, you've already mentioned, you're feeling more like Frodo than Sam when it comes to Gollum, or would you be as suspicious as Sam, basically?
I would be as suspicious as Sam. Don't get me wrong. I think that the suspicion is more than merited. So for him to sit there and be eating his lembas and to just look at him and internally be muttering, he should have just been choked out already. Like, that's extreme to me.
Yeah, especially for Sam.
You know, and in this chapter, we talk a little bit about how everybody seems to be under the influence of something. Yeah. How Sam is under a spell, not under a spell, but under a weight, and how Frodo's definitely under a weight, and how nobody's asking Gollum, but he seems to be under a weight as well. So I think that, what it could be is whatever pall is over them is having a negative impact on him. But to just sit there eating your lunch and to look at somebody going, God, I wish somebody would just choke you out. That's not appropriate behavior. Like, that's not charitable in any way.
You don't like the mean thoughts,
No,
Sam.
that's a little dark. That's a little twisty, even for me, especially from our golden retriever boy, right? Like, this is not the Samwise from the Green Dragon.
I do agree with that. I don't like the mean, nasty thoughts. I do agree with the suspicion. So I'm somewhere in between Frodo and Sam, basically. Yeah. I'm on Frodo's level when it comes to not having mean, nasty, terrible thoughts. I'm on Sam's level when it comes to the suspicion, basically. Okay, so after a long day's sleep, Frodo and Sam wake up, and Sam tries to take stock of their food inventory, asking Frodo how long their task taking the ring to Mordor was going to take, and what they were going to do about food for the return. They then have a bit of a moment where Frodo basically just says he doesn't see them needing anything, as he doesn't anticipate there will be a return journey. Any thoughts about this pretty tender moment between the two of them?
Yeah, I was just like, oh, we're saying the quiet parts out loud. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that it was very tender and vulnerable for both of them. And I love that it was written out the way that it was, and that it was as vulnerable as it was.
Yeah. In the sort of description, Sam holds Frodo's hand and bows over it, and he doesn't kiss it, they say, but his tears do fall onto his hand. And I found that to be just yet another classic Frodo and Sam lesson in healthy male intimacy. Basically, like, these two are just, they are bros, man. They are like this. And I kind of love that about them. They're just really sweet together.
Yeah.
So,
and it also, again, so he's referred to him as master quite a bit. So again, I managed to put it aside. Put it aside, right? He refers to him as master several times in these first two chapters. But this is a moment between peers.
Yeah.
And so it just adds layers to it that both of them each allowed themselves to cross that divide between master and servant, perceived or otherwise. I don't feel like Frodo really perceives Sam as a servant, but because Sam perpetuates the term master, it's hard to ignore it on Sam's part.
Yeah, agreed. I wish it was different, but it's fine. So the party finally reaches the dead marshes and begins to cross them. Flickering lights and pale dead faces in the water surround them, though according to Gollum, the dead in the water are not physically there. There are men and elves and orcs laying there from a battle long ago. And so we got to hear a lot about what it looked and felt like in the marshes. Anything stand out to you?
Candles of corpses is a name. That's a thing. So for the flickering lights, that's quite a thing. And don't look in while the candles are lit. Those are some very specific elements that I was like, wow, that really kind of elevates it. So I remember the marshes as kind of almost a fever dream approach. And this is just a little bit more horrifying. So another way that the book kind of amped up the experience. So that was interesting to read.
We got a lot of like landscape description in this one. I know, it was a lot. Like, I'm not complaining, but I'm so much better at picking out literary umami in the chapters where the landscape is beautiful, right? We get these sweeping, grassy hills, this beautiful sunsets. We get all this stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, this is beautiful. I love reading about this. And then we get to the dead marshes, and we're getting a lot of what it looks and feels like. And I'm just like, I don't.
And it turns out the dead marshes aren't the deadest thing, because as they move beyond the edges of the marshes,
it's worse.
The land is even worse. You know, at least in the marshes, and I'm paraphrasing, you have the corpulence of stuff that grows where things rot. You don't even have that.
It was It was a rough one. It's harder for me, I think, to focus on language when, like descriptive language when it's not describing something pretty. That feels so shallow, but like that's just kind of how I experienced it personally.
Yeah, it was all grays and browns and gross and fumes and reeking and
Squishes.
It was all bad. It was all really bad.
Not a pleasant thing to read, for sure.
I think all of that also I kind of glazed over. The most interesting part of this chapter for me was Sam witnessing a Gollum Smeagol conversation.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's see. What do I have here? So Sam he's talking to himself about what to do about Frodo and the Precious. The Gollum side of the conversation points out that if they just take the ring, they would be the master and wouldn't have to worry about obeying Frodo, which I totally saw coming. And he carries on for a bit, making plans, debating himself, like talking about how she might help them later. And then Sam pretends to wake up because things are kind of getting a little like they're ramping up. He's kind of like working himself up to something. How do you feel about how all that went down?
I think that it was interesting because I, if I remember correctly, there was only one scene in the movies where somebody said, "What did you say?" And he goes, "Not talking to you." And that's as close as it's come to anybody other than the audience, the movie watchers, experiencing a Gollum Smeagol conversation. So having Sam see that, I think, is brilliant and interesting. And I can't wait to see how that plays out over the remainder of their travels. The other thing that really, really stood out to me about Smeagol's argument with himself is that there's hints of real ambition in there. So it's talking about being Lord Smeagol or Gollum the Great. And I kind of, it took me out of the book for a second. I stopped and went, whoa. So coveting the ring endlessly no problem. Like that's the landscape that I'm used to. The idea of blind ambition appealing to Smeagol in any way threw me way off. I could see that happening to a character who hadn't been affected by the ring as long, I guess. I don't know, but it was just weird to me. I'm like, he's lived in a cave. He eats raw wriggly fishes. Like, the idea of him wanting to be a lord or in mastery of some way was just so strange to me. That was probably the biggest thing for that whole section was I did not see that coming.
I guess I just chalked it up to like that's the influence of the ring, right? Because the Dark Lord is all about that, like becoming the ruler of all. But then why was he down in the caves for that long? You know, he didn't have ambition while he was down there, or maybe he did and he was just trying to keep the ring for himself. Who knows? But that was a different side of him for sure.
Yeah, coveting the precious, I have no problem believing that. I just Lord Smeagol and Gollum the Great really kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. So we'll see if there's anything else like that. I just was not expecting it.
There was another different side of Smeagol, and maybe I'm just like reading too much into it. But at one point, Sam is complaining about the smell of everything. He's like, everything smells like you smell, Smeagol, whatever, because Smeagol was like sniffing the air, I guess was the context. And Smeagol replies that Sam stinks too, essentially saying, "Poor Smeagol smells it, but good Smeagol bears it." And to me, that was like witty almost. Like he wasn't just like saying that, he was like jabbing him in like kind of a witty way, which was not expected from him either.
But he's obviously clever to a certain extent because the ring chose him. He's been able to keep it.
Yeah.
So he's clearly not a stupid character by any means.
Definitely not. And he keeps showing that. Now that we get to talk to him even more. So we got Sam, we got Smeagol. Let's talk about Frodo. At one point, a ring wraith passes not far over them, and then we get a bit of Frodo's perspective. The ring is growing physically heavy. Frodo can feel an eye on him, a horrible growing sense of a hostile will that strove with great power to pin you under its deadly gaze, naked and immovable. That sounds pretty terrible. Were you
Mhm.
glad to get the status check from Frodo, just at least to know
Mhm.
kind of where he's at?
Yeah, so the weight
Yeah.
that he's carrying and the mention of I with a capital E starts in chapter 1, like right off. It's capitalized. So and then it's kind of elucidated here. It's clarified that yes, no, this is not just the Paul of traveling through scary territory. He is feeling it like a physical weight, and it is coming from the ring. It's referenced a couple times in the reading, and then by the time we get to the end of chapter 2, Tolkien's just telling us point blank, like, this is having a physical effect on him, like additional gravity.
Yeah.
And that's validating because as it was mentioned through chapter 1 and chapter 2, I was like, is this because of the ring? And thanks for the payoff.
Yep, sure is. So the three stumbled on through the weary end of the night, and until the coming of another day of fear, they walked in silence with bowed heads, seeing nothing and hearing nothing but the wind hissing in their ears. That's the end of the chapter. Any final thoughts or notes before we pick an MVP?
I wish that we had started a Nazgul sighting counter. So we had a couple of sightings in this read.
We did.
And I was like, how many times have we seen something cross the moon? I wish we had counted.
Yeah, I guess in this read alone, it was the thing that inspired Gandalf to flee. Yeah, 3, and then 1 whenever Frodo was like dangling from the cliff or like down at the bottom of the cliff or something like that, like lightning strikes, whatever, something crazy happens, and then a third time just while they're
Yeah.
Wait,
and that leaves Gollum on the ground in the fetal position because he's overdone. He's like 3 times can't be an accident.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Wait, so then that would be 4 from this read because it was 3 from with them.
Yeah, 3 just for them.
And then 1 for Gandalf and Pippin and that crew. Lots of Nazgul sightings this time.
Yeah. So anytime a shape flies over the moon.
Well, for a while there, it was like, is it an eagle? Because we kept getting eagles there for a bit.
Yeah.
And now it just feels like it's just Nazgul. Like we're just getting the ring race this time.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay.
So that's it. Nazgul counter. Future self.
Okay. From now on. All right. So we've got a tradition where we pick an MVP from the chapters we've read for each episode. Cue the music. Jessica, who would you name as your MVP this episode?
This episode was hard because I was so excited to have our boys back. But I'm going to give it up for Gandalf.
Okay.
And all the lore and saving Pippin's silly behind.
Okay.
Having OP Gandalf the White back is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced that Pippin would have been okay if it wasn't for Gandalf being there and being able to reason out what happened with him, how exposed are they by the interaction that Pippin had. I'm like, I need to give it up for Gandalf.
Yeah, it was impressive. I mean, even at one point, Pippin was like passed out or whatever, and he like touches him on the head or something and revives him. So you got to love a little healing spell.
Yeah.
Or whatever that was. A little jolt of adrenaline to get him to come back. So that's a respectable choice. But let me just say that is it the first time this book I'm picking something different from you? Like we have been side by side with this, but I think I'm going to deviate here.
Okay.
And I think for the maybe first time at all, period, throughout this entire podcast, I am going to pick Frodo as my MVP. Because he kept such a level head throughout such terrible circumstances with the weight of the ring weighing him down. Even though Sam wanted to climb down first at one point, Frodo took charge because he knew that Sam wasn't going to be able to do it. Like he got, injured and Sam helped him and stuff like that. So like props to Sam for sure. But Sam also had the like extreme suspicion and the negative thoughts. Frodo though had the idea to have Gollum swear on the ring. He his choices got them through the dead marshes and everything, because without Gollum, no way they would have made it. So just overall, I think I just got to give some mad props and respect to Frodo, and just the realism, right? Granted, he's very despondent, probably because of the effect of the ring and the eye looking always for him. But just like knowing that what he's doing probably doesn't have a path back, like he's literally going to his doom. I guess that's a interesting way to put it. He's literally approaching doom, and he's doing it willingly with his eyes wide open. It's just that's a hero right there, even if he comes in a small package. So
yeah,
that's my choice.
Solid.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it. Okay, well, let us know in the comments or on Discord, if you're on my Discord, who you think the MVP this session is. You've got Gandalf, you've got Frodo, you've got Shadowfax. I actually considered it. So yeah, there's several like viable options. If you're more on Team Sam when it comes to the mean thoughts about Gollum, it could be Sam. He had a rope that also helped them out. It could be Gollum if you've got really interesting taste. Whoever it is, just let us know. I'm curious. And also, if more people pick Frodo than pick Gandalf, then I will feel very, very justified in my answer. Not because I'm competitive. It's because I'm competitive. But don't feel compelled to pick Frodo. Pick who you think is the real MVP. We're very curious to hear your choice. Yes. Okay, so read for next week, Book 4, Chapters 3 through 5. And thank you so much for tuning in to episode 5 of season 3 of But Are There Dragons, brought to you by your hosts, Jessica Sadai and me, Kritter XD. Don't forget to follow us at But Are There Dragons on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and But Dragons Pod, just one T, on X. You can also find your hosts on social media as Kritter XD and Shelf Indulgence. That's it for today. We're workshopping new catchphrases for season 3, so let us know on social media how you feel about this one. So I'm going to give you a little backstory on this one. Jessica found it. I think it's great, but she suggested that I should give it a go because sometimes I like to do impressions, and I do not have a canned Gollum impression, so I'm going to do my best. Please don't make fun of me. But if you do make fun of me, do it in the comments because that helps with the algorithm. Okay, Let's go.
Follow Smeagol. He can take you through the marshes.